we're just over a week out, and I think in past elections, the conventional wisdom was there would always be a surprise. We had a surprise in 2015 with an open seat and John Bel Edwards winning over David Vitter. And we had a surprise in 2003 with Kathleen Blanco winning over Bobby Jindal. And we had a surprise in 1995 with Mike Foster defeating Buddy Roemer and Mary Landrieu and Cleo Fields. We had a surprise in 1991 with Edwin Edwards coming back from the grave and beating David Duke. It was thought then that Buddy Roemer would be the candidate who would win, but didn't work out. And many thought this would be another surprise, but at this point, with the election in its waning days, the primary on the 14th of October, the general election on the 18th of November, Jeff Landry is in the driver's seat, and until further notice, he's the favorite. He was the favorite when the race began, and he remains so today.
Talk a little about his decision not to participate. He only participated in one of the 4 debates. Do you think that helped him or hurt him, or what do you think?
At this point, I don't know that it hurt him that much, and candidates have handlers, and as we know, strategists often determine whether something is going to hurt more than help. And with Jeff Landry so far in front in the polls, all the other candidates take aim at him, and I don't think he viewed it as a fair fight. So the fact that most people haven't raised any real commotion about him not appearing in debates is notable, because I don't think it hurt him enough to make a difference, and he's in front, and he wants to protect his lead. And this is not unprecedented. Bobby Jindal in 2011, when he ran for re-election, didn't debate anybody. He had several candidates running against him. So it's not unusual for candidates to play dodgeball, go in the witness protection program when it's in their interests.
Do you think Landry has any chance of winning it outright in the jungle primary?
I don't. Now, there are others who do, but I don't. I think he will be in a runoff, probably with Sean Wilson. But remember, when John Bel Edwards won his 2 elections as the only Democratic victor in a statewide race, he ran first in both primaries. He ran 17 points ahead of David Vitter in 2015, and he ran 19 points ahead of Eddie Risponi in 2019. So if Sean Wilson does not run first, I think he has a real problem. And at this point, it looks like Landry will run first and Wilson will run second. Now, I know Hunter Lundy and Stephen Waguespack both believe they've got a shot, and they do, but it's not a real good shot.
Do you know where the polls stand? Have you looked at a recent poll to give us the percentages between Landry and Wilson?
Well, the most notable thing about these polls, I think, is the large number of undecided voters. And also the fact that Wilson at this point is not getting the lion's share of the black vote. And it would be expected that a Democrat, and especially a minority Democrat, would get about 95% of the African-American vote. So if only black voters voted for Sean Wilson, he probably would make the runoff. So that's why Hunter Lundy in the last few weeks in particular has made an effort to appeal to minority voters. But I think at this point, Landry's probably looking at getting about 35% in the primary, and Wilson probably around 25%. And that leaves only 40% for the rest of the candidates. And we have other candidates in addition to Lundy and Waguespack. We've got John Schroeder, the sitting state treasurer. We've got Sharon Hewitt, a state lawmaker, and we've got an array of minor candidates. So when you have all of those people dividing up the other 40%, you can see the math really doesn't work real well for easing past Sean Wilson and getting into a runoff with Jeff Landry. And that seems to be the strategy right now, is that Landry has one slot locked up, and the only hope for another candidate is to pass Sean Wilson. But that appears to be a daunting prospect and not a likelihood, albeit Wilson has never won a race. He ran once for the Lafayette City Council and lost. He's a relative novice when it comes to electoral politics, but he has good candidate skills, and he has the advantage of being the only major Democrat in the race, and also of being a minority in a state in which 1/3 of our citizens are black.
It would be a historic first black governor if he was the one to win.
First black elected governor. We have had some unusual things happen in Reconstruction. P.B.S. Pinchback was governor 150 years ago, but that was an appointed situation. No black candidate in Louisiana for any statewide election has ever cracked 46%. Kip Holden did the best when he ran against Billy Nungesser for lieutenant governor in 2015. So Sean Wilson will be a historic figure if he gets 40%. And my guess is that he'll get 40. He might even get 45. But it becomes really, really difficult. A lot of heavy lifting to try to get from 45 to 50% plus one vote. And that's why Jeff Landry right now, if they were betting in Las Vegas, and they may be, he's the overwhelming favorite to win this race.
What do you think are some of the key issues that voters care about?
The issues that voters care about often are determined by party affiliation. For example, polls have shown Democratic voters really care about the environment, climate change, how coastal erosion is affecting our state, believe it's an existential threat and that we have to do something about it. Republicans, not so much. Republicans are more zoned in on crime. But I think both parties, to some extent, believe that we have some economic issues that are profound in our state, with about a quarter of our citizens below the poverty level. And when we look at Louisiana, we have this abundance of natural resources, and yet among southern states, we've grown the least in the last 40 years, 11%. Some of these states have tripled their population. So what's going on? Why, with all of our advantages being rich farmland, the major river, the biggest ports in the United States are in Louisiana, why are we lagging behind other southern states? And that's a question I think that candidates should be addressing, and people to some extent are concerned about. But as we know, politics is often about the now, and the now is such that we're interested in things that involve bread and butter. And we've got some inflation, which is more of a national issue, but there's worldwide inflation related to the pandemic. And the pandemic caused us to focus a lot on social issues we have not in the past. And so there's even an amendment on the ballot regarding whether churches can be shut down by a governor, and that's in response to what Governor John Bel Edwards did. And so some of these candidates, as we know, are focusing on social issues because they believe it's a winner in Louisiana. And we are now in a conservative state. We are definitely in a red state with conservative views as a people. And it's ironic because about 40% of the people are at odds with that perspective, but 40% doesn't win you an election.
I spoke with the Rapides Parish Registrar of Voters, and she says that in-person voting to her in Rapides Parish is low. And I believe that it's low statewide. All of the early voting is low statewide. Do you see a reason for why people may not be as concerned about this election? Do you think it's because they see it's a foregone conclusion that Landry is going to win?
There might be some of that, Joel, but in truth, Louisiana is not as geared up for gubernatorial elections as many think. We often talk about how we revere our governor, and certainly we treat our governor as though he or she is royalty. But to give an example, 4 years ago, we had an extremely competitive governor's election, and John Bel Edwards won by 40,000 votes over Eddie Rispone. He got 774,000 votes. That was 82,000 fewer votes than Joe Biden received in defeat the following year in Louisiana in a race against Donald Trump that Trump won in our state by 400,000 votes. So about 500,000 more people voted in 2020 for a presidential election that was not close. There was no doubt Trump was going to get our electoral votes, than voted in a governor's election that was really close. So for whatever reason, we're not as excited about gubernatorial politics as we once were. And that's a question that I think a lot of political scientists should look at, because if either of the major candidates, and I'm counting that as Wilson or Landry, were to get out their votes, they would win. And one of them will win. But in truth, we know that more than half of the registered voters in our state will not vote either in the primary of October 14th or the runoff of November 18th.
Anything else you would like to add?
You've been quite thorough. I hope I'm wrong about turnout. And I hope that in the runoff, and you mentioned Landry and his sidestepping debates. My guess is that he will debate in the runoff, and that he will debate more than once, probably 2 or 3 times, and that we will know a lot more about the candidates. But at this point, we live in until further notice, we live in a conservative state in which being a Republican is helpful, and we have more white people than we do black people. So at this point on paper, and perhaps in reality, a white Republican is going to be the favorite over a black Democrat.